Hello and welcome to the next episode of Gamma's Sustainability Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about what it's like to work in ESG. My colleague and I often get asked from around the business, how do we get into our roles? What skills do you need to get into to be working in ESG? So Callum, who's with us today, is going to talk about his journey into his environmental data manager role, and I'll share some of my experiences as well. Hopefully, we'll be able to give some insights into the types of work that people need to be doing, types of skills that you need, and actually what it's just like working in ESG. So, introduce Callum Lydon. Callum, what's your role in Gamma, please?
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I am Gamma's environmental data manager. So it is effectively my task to continuously monitor, gather energy and emissions data for the business, including acquisitions that we make, to make sure that we are accountable for our net zero plans, which is, of course, a focal point in sustainability, in contemporary sustainability.
So how long have you worked at Gamma and what did you do before?
So I've been working at Gamma for over 3.5 years. Mm-hmm. The role at Gamma, as I just mentioned, is that we need to be very aware of corporate sustainability themes, make sure that we are meeting the needs and expectations of our stakeholders when it comes to sustainability. Mm-hmm. However, I was working for about 5 years prior to joining Gamma in various capacities in engineering and consultancy. Mm-hmm. So I have previously had experience in environmental monitoring and compliance work on major infrastructure projects in the UK, mm-hmm. As well as advising at an executive level non-engineering firms, whether they be finance, utilities, etc.
Mm-hmm. Have you always wanted to work in environmental management, environmental sustainability?
It's curious when I look back on my, not just my experience, but where it all started. I went to university to study environmental science predominantly because I just had a pure interest in it. And I don't think my brain at the time was programmed into thinking about work. It was more, the academic side of what I was, going to study, as well as the I suppose the debauchery associated with student life, but then soon came opportunities to work in sustainability, which is just fantastic. Yeah. And what's really interesting when I look back is that when I started, without wanting to age myself, when I started in my studies, mm-hmm. Roughly, I would say 10 to 15 years ago, the consensus was that the jobs market was going to be quite prescriptive in terms of you can kind of only go into, compliance roles, or if you have sort of corporate experience, maybe consultancy roles. Mm-hmm. Obviously, that the game's changed in that respect, and there are just so many opportunities out there, mm-hmm. Which I, from personal experience, can vouch for, just did not exist 10 years ago.
No. Do you enjoy your role at Gamma?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the key things for me, well, there's two that come to mind initially in response to that question. The first is ultimately making a difference, and that we can actively contribute to our value, our business value of always wanting to do the right thing. I think that's particularly encapsulated by the work that we do, mm-hmm. But also, and as you well know, Chris, the landscape for ESG, particularly corporate ESG, is so rapidly changing that there's always a new challenge. Yeah. There is not, a month that goes by where we are not confronted with either emerging regulation or new best practice initiatives. And it's really important for us at Gamma, to be accountable to our stakeholders and be on top of those trends. So absolutely, the work, it can be challenging. There's no question about that, but there's always a new challenge. Mm-hmm. And that's the key thing that keeps my hand in the game. So, Chris, what are the key challenges that you see working in ESG, not just at Gamma, but perhaps in the telecom sector as a whole?
It's a really good question. I find that convincing people to buy in is something that is, I'm always particularly, I don't know if sensitive is the right word, but very, very aware of. That I think there's a difference between what people personally believe and actually what they value professionally. Let's face it, the vast majority of people go to work to make money, and the undertone is making a difference as well. I think the majority of people that work in sustainability actually go to work because they want to make a difference and they want to make money. The priority is a lot more equal than it might be for people in other roles. So convincing people that sustainability needs to become part of their roles, and that's both internally and externally, is the biggest challenge I find. I think it's a good challenge. It's a good challenge really, because I think if this was easy, everyone would be doing it. And I think if everyone just sort of bought in like that, then you probably wouldn't have the innovation that you have in terms of ideas as to how an organization can incorporate sustainability and still manage costs and still make a profit effectively. We've talked in a previous podcast with our engineering director and head of data center infrastructure about actually building sustainability into what they do is allowing them to not necessarily think differently, but take a bigger picture approach to decision making, and that's allowing them to rationalize the network. It's allowing them to challenge suppliers in different ways, which ultimately drives innovation, drives technological innovation, and that is what we need in this industry. Where there's a huge push. Telecoms changes not quite as quickly as sustainability, I don't think, having worked on both sides of the coin, so to speak, in this company. But pushing suppliers to do things differently, driving innovation is really key to sustainability. And I don't think that would be possible if it was just easy. I don't think that would be possible if people just bought in. I think you'd need all those sorts of different perspectives.
So it's really interesting what you say there, Chris. I mean, initially, and if I'm interpreting your answer correctly, there is a skill in itself in finding that sweet spot between the purist in you that absolutely wants to bring the enthusiasm to the table to deliver on all of the incredible plans that we have, and deliver, frankly, meaningful change for the business, the sector, the communities that we operate in, and then balancing that with the pragmatism that you need to be success in a company. Could you just maybe talk to us a little bit about the challenges that you faced in trying to find that sweet spot?
Yeah, so it's immensely difficult, because I moved from another part of the business in directing business change, where we were about making all of our operational teams, our sales teams, the support teams, the provisioning teams, making them as efficient as they possibly can be. So we're not growing unnecessarily. And I've flipped from that into a role that is about, I'm driven by that purism, that desire to do good, that desire to make an impact, which you talk about there. And I find that conflict, because obviously my role continues to be about driving change, but it's driving sustainable change. It's doing different things in the business and doing them that might not have an obvious impact on the bottom line, but there's opportunity around. And we were talking in a previous podcast to our engineering director and our head of data center infrastructure about how they've incorporated sustainability into their decision making, and actually they're driving good. They're doing they're extending the lifespan of individual pieces of network hardware beyond Gamma, because they're thinking more broadly, and that's where you get that warm fuzzy feeling about sustainability. But we could do more if we had unlimited amounts of money to invest in this. And in an organisation the size of Gamma, in many organisations around the UK, you can see that there is wiggle room in finances, or it seems like it anyway from our perspective, that there's enough space in finances and the financial strength of companies to be doing more than they might possibly be doing. But you have to rein that almost emotive response and desire to do good in for a realistic, pragmatic approach or pragmatic mindset that is about the business and those who control the finances in the business can't just write a blank check. They can't just go, yeah, ESG team, off you go. Do what you need to do to make the world right. Go fix the world. You can't do that. They're responsible and accountable to a number of different stakeholders, both internal and external, financially and and socially. And being able to balance that is immensely difficult. But I think bringing this back to what makes someone working in this space successful is the ability to appreciate both perspectives and request investment where that investment is going to drive both value for society, the environment, but also value for the business. And it's absolutely achievable. It's absolutely achievable. Working in this space, that is it's probably one of the most challenging and rewarding things, that aspects of the role, I think.
That's really, really interesting. I think I've got two questions for you regarding the long-term working in ESG, and I'll come back to actually payoffs and investments and trying to sort of persuade and influence those who have the ability to help us in our cause. But having worked with you for a year now, you've made a great impact on the team. And considering the long term, would it be fair to say that as an ESG Programme Manager, that if you were a tremendous success over the next 5-10 years, that you would ultimately be doing yourself out of a job?
It's a really good question, isn't it? And that's something that I've heard in different circles is actually sustainability professionals, if they're successful, the aim is for them not to exist. You integrate sustainable business practices into business as usual processes, then ultimately, what are you doing? What's your purpose there? But as you well know, the landscape here changes so fast. This isn't a short-term, make some sustainable, alter business process to become more sustainable. If I take an example of our, again in our network, something that I've spoken about with Mark is about switching non-production kit off out of hours. Driving that change into the business. So it becomes when we introduce a new piece of kit, can we switch it off out of hours? Should we switch it off out of hours? So that we're always looking to run the network in the most optimal way, both from an energy consumption perspective and a cost perspective there. Those are all relatively short term, those changes. As the business evolves, there'll be a continual need to analyze and assess the business and its practices, the different functions. It may start to do different things with, the acquisitions that Gamma have made. We don't know enough about how they operate day in, day out. So there will always be a need to adapt and change. Looking outside of Gamma at the regulatory landscape, at the environmental landscape, sort of primarily, that changes so often, and it changes so quick, and the need to respond and the need to adapt is really high. That's looking more longer term, and therefore, are we doing ourselves out of the job? I think you might say we are, you might say we should be aiming to, but the reality is, I don't think that'll happen. There's too much change. This sector or industry, sub-industry, if you like, moves too quickly.
No, that's definitely a view that I think I would subscribe to as well. Knowing the regulatory and best practice landscape as I do, I think this is something that a lot of people outside of the ESG bubble would not appreciate, is just how fast paced the changes are. And the burdens and the stresses that we are put under accordingly. And I think a challenge within working in ESG is trying to communicate, frankly, to finance professionals who have had their principles set in stone for decades, if not centuries, to try and articulate that this is always going to be moving. This is a piece of work that is not set in stone. We need to just be responsive and adaptable to the challenges that we face, and ultimately try and deliver for our stakeholders. And I think that's a really difficult thing to try and communicate.
It's new, isn't it? So compared to those financial reporting frameworks that you just referenced, and there's an obvious comparison to draw, isn't it? Because of the legislation, the disclosure landscape that we operate in. that's well established. Those practices are well versed. Systems are in place to make this the generation of that information or the production of that information more efficient. Whereas the environmental and social data, what investors are looking for, is rapidly changing. What disclosures are looking for is all rapidly changing. It's evolving. So that's kind of it's new. And in that sense, a fairly dry aspect of this work can be quite exciting because it's pushing a business in different directions. It's asking us to do different things and new things. And as we expand into Europe, accessing those new markets, the European legislation landscape is also asking different things of us, isn't it? So we're having to change. And that's one of the really good things I like about this, is that you're not sat still. It's new. It's dynamic. We're having to be creative. We're having to be innovative in terms of how we measure ourselves, how we compare ourselves up against other industries and other companies out there.
Of course, there's a political edge to all of this as well, and this is something that we've seen increasingly. I suppose political perspectives being especially divergent over the last few years, where perhaps they hadn't been popular over, let's say, a 10-year period. So, of course, it's not just the regulatory landscape, which, of course, is influenced by political pressures. It's not just investors. It's not just the expectations and needs of our employees either. We've got to also keep an eye on what's going out there in the wider world. And I think that's something that's kind of, it's just really interesting. It really is, to have your finger on the pulse with current affairs, actually kind of crucial to the role.
Yeah.
And I dare say in trying to predict future legislation and trends. So we know between us and operating in the UK public sector that there is not just an expectation, but frankly a requirement that businesses supplying to the government, certainly for big contracts, are pledged to net zero and are going to do it the right way. Do you see those foundations shaking, not just in the UK, but globally? And do you think that could have a consequence on the work that we do?
I think it will. I think at the moment, political landscape is obviously quite volatile. How that unfolds in the short term, we will see. And again, looking at what it's like to work in it can almost be a little bit unnerving, because many can feel a little bit unsettled as to actually what's the longevity look like in this space. But in the short term, there's obviously some uncertainty there, but in the long term, this is going to come back round, isn't it? And it will become abundantly obvious that we need to do more, that more drastic action it will be required as we see what happens over the next few years and the impacts of certain decisions that have been taken around the world. How will we get to a stage where I don't want to say, so we have to unpick that, but will we have to make up for a bit of lost time? It's entirely possible. And how do we do that in what will ultimately be a shorter time frame? So I guess we don't know, to the question what that will look like. Inevitably, it's going to change. We'll have to respond. But in my view, I don't think it will go away. I think it just we'll see different problems that are as a consequence of the reason why we're in this work.
I think that's again a view I would subscribe to as well. If you're steadfastly behind the climate science, the implication for that is that no matter the political comings and goings, in the long term, this isn't going away, and there are going to be ups and downs. There are going to be people who are lobbying for certain things to happen and not to happen, and there is going to be public dissatisfaction with investments, let's say in repairing the environment and long-term climate investments, when there are people, communities, and not just in the UK but abroad, that feel underinvested in or left behind. So that is a real difficult challenge, I think, for businesses to have to deal with, that uncertainty of the comings and goings. And I suppose my personal view is that we will soon see, should those political interventions manifest in changes, who are the businesses out there that are going to stand by their commitments, regardless of the political pressures that they face, regardless of the external landscape. I think that will be quite telling as to which businesses are absolutely doing it to deliver social value. And absolutely understand that the work that they do can make a difference compared to those who are, shall we say, along for the ride and doing the bare minimum and ticking boxes.
So we've talked quite a bit now about some of the challenges and some of the things that are in your mind day in, day out, week in, week out, working in sustainability. If you were to give advice to someone who was expressing interest in working in sustainability, what are the three factors that you would ask them to consider or get them to consider suggesting?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of factors that those who express an interest in sustainability, who haven't worked, of course, in the ESG space, probably haven't considered. The thing that comes to mind immediately, and this is almost round circle to the start of the conversation, is you must be able to be pragmatic in your role. You absolutely must be able to see the bigger picture and understand the needs of the business in the short term, and not be bullish to the point where you actually cause the opposite effect to happen. If you're too bullish, you will turn people off. You need to link everything that you do to the bigger picture, the business strategy, and the long-term payoff that, yes, we're going to deliver and we're going to create social value, but we're actually, that can coexist with business value as well.
Yeah. So you're not talking about, trying to put the fire out that's in people's bellies that makes them want to do something. You're talking about it has to be balanced. You have to take a break.
Absolutely. It's the key thing is
energy.
Absolutely, the key thing is balance. And perhaps having worked in ESG for nearly 4 years at Gamma, you could say that the requirement to understand the needs of the business has dampened the enthusiasm, or dampened the desire to absolutely deliver 100% of what we're capable of. That's not the case. The enthusiasm absolutely lives on. It's just that you have to be completely aware of the bigger picture in the business and understand the needs of the business, its values, and ultimately the long-term strategy.
I interrupted you there before you were going to say two more things. I said top three things.
I think the second thing that I would advise someone to consider is just how fast-paced the regulatory and best practice landscape is. I think a lot of people, if we forget about ESG for a minute, could be quite dissatisfied by the idea that work that was done, say, a year, 2 years ago, could become out of date and not as relevant and not as meaningful as was previously thought. So I think it's crucial that people go into ESG understand that you could spend an awfully long time doing work that serves purpose, but ultimately needs to be moved on. So yeah, I think that's definitely something that surprised me coming into it.
Yeah.
I would just definitely make sure that people are aware that is almost certainly going to be the case for various external reasons. Yeah.
I think the only one I would chuck in on top of that is if you haven't come from an environmental academic background, the path into it's not always obvious. So it's actually, if you want to work in it, if you've got a personal desire to work in it, you have to understand what your skill set is, what are your transferable skills, because there's no obvious link from another discipline in and around Gamma straight into sustainability, straight into ESG. So what are your transferable skills? If you don't have them, what could you develop that could become transferable and open those doors to you in the future? So working, for people looking from the outside in who want to be part of those teams, it's exploring that, really honing in on what are those transferable capabilities that they may have, and how might an ESG team or department exploit those transferable skills to the benefit of the individual and the organization.
And the key thing there, Chris, is that unlike 10, 15 years ago, there was just an abundance of roles out there. So there are so many specific jobs that you can work in ESG. There are numerical and analyst roles. There are, of course, as we know, a lot of requirements on us to report, whether that's publicly or to our customers and suppliers. So there's, soft skills in writing, speaking, communicating. And of course, the work that you do, you could probably tell us a bit more about in terms of that ability to persuade and influence to deliver a program as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny what you say about those roles that the people have been in for 4 or 5 years. As the spike, there's sort of been around the advent of the pandemic and the accelerated interest, if you like, from lots of companies in ESG. I was listening to a podcast the other day that was telling me, they were explaining how the people that have been in those roles for 5 or 10 years have been sort of sucked up into senior management, and there's an absence of the doers in ESG to actually make the meaningful change. So all of those people with that experience, because it's so niche as a subject matter, and to the earlier point, you have to kind of utilize transferable skills to get into those people that have actually been here and are, they're earlier on in their, or they've taken that career route earlier on. They've been sucked up, leaving a void, and now there's a bit of a chasm as to, hang on, we haven't got people who know what to do the doing, if you like, in ESG. So that's another fast-paced aspect of this in that companies are not quite sure how they fill those gaps. Employees are not quite sure how could they fill those gaps if they so chose to.
On the theme of senior management, you've been in role a year now, Chris. Have you been surprised at all about the exposure that you have in the work that you're doing with our executive team, the board, and our ESG committee?
Have I been surprised? No, because chatting with, in the research I was doing before applying for the role, I was aware that this was an aspect of it, and it's heavily scrutinized, isn't it, ESG externally, and therefore it immediately almost has eyes on of certain members of C-suite, and so it wasn't a surprise. I think having not had that before, I've worked at sort of senior leadership level, reported into senior leadership level, should I say, understanding the dynamics and the type of work that you need to do to be able to report well into that level of the business was new to me, and is a challenge. And I'm hoping that our execs will see it's a challenge that I've embraced and done reasonably well at. But very much learning in that space, and very much learning.
And I'll put you on the spot and ask this question: can we deliver the transition plan and all the social value propositions that we have without our executive support?
No. It's simple that we can't. They're too big. The impacts of each of the things that we need to do is externally facing. So our exco need to be able to buy into the initiatives that we have, that we're planning on delivering. Certainly, as we mentioned in the podcast about our data center, that's such a big consumer of electricity, and it dominates our group consumption, that the eyes on have to be at that level because of the changes that we need to make. There is an element of at least needing to be informed, more than likely consulted. They actually probably what's most appropriate is sponsored at that level. So no, I don't think we can. And to be honest, I think recently I'm seeing a desire to understand more and support more as well, naturally and organically, which is really reassuring, really positive. So I don't think we're pushing against something that is immovable there. I think actually that quite organically in Gamma, as the understanding grows in terms of what we need to do to achieve our net zero targets, there's people coming, are getting themselves on the bus, if you like, to come for the ride.
Yeah, absolutely. And I completely agree, by the way. I think the executive support is just paramount to the execution of our plans. And I'm glad to say that we've got it here at Gamma. Chris, what's one thing that has surprised you the most in your 1 year as our ESG Programme Manager?
I would say how different people around the business can be daunted by the subject. It's quite a technical subject, more so than I realised when I first started. And there's different roles around the business. I interface a lot with our customer-facing roles, and this is, by no means any slant on those guys, because I think if roles are reversed, I'd lean on them heavily as well. But as soon as something sustainability or ESG related comes up, it's right, we have an ESG team. We'll let them answer those questions. And confidence in being able to talk about this subject around the business is something that, I think we're lacking. It's something that I'd like to start to address this year. And there's a number of things that I'm working on that will hopefully enable that. But it's always so specialist that, to go into detail with customers, you need the expertise there. But actually just to be able to have a confident conversation around what's Scope 1 emissions, what's Scope 2 emissions, you don't necessarily need to be able to remember the facts and figures, but just understanding the principles of what they are in some respects, completely different context, but it's the same sort of notion of having a conversation about technology with our customers. What is UCAS? What can that do for your business? Actually, ESG, what are Gamma doing? What can Gamma do to help us? What can we do to help Gamma? All of those conversations. People in customer-facing roles, people around the business who are supporting those customer-facing staff, they're not, I'd say they're not confident, not unwilling. I'd say they're not confident having those conversations, and often will kind of default to us to answer those. And that surprises me.
Yeah.
To answer your question, that surprises me.
I think speaking to people around the business, an observation I've had, and I don't know whether you have consistent view to me on this, is that when we talk about our ESG proposition, people are really and endlessly supportive of the work we are trying to do in social value. The Gamma Scholarships Programme is just a fantastic example of the work that we've done in that space, and have, frankly, been able to deliver some fantastic impacts for individuals embarking on studies. Do you, however, sense a bit more emotion in the whole net zero carbon reduction piece, and, dare I say, a bit more skepticism that you wouldn't find when just discussing social value alone?
Yeah, I think so. And there's numerous reasons for that. I believe that this is a global problem. Climate change is a global problem that we have to solve. And the only way we're going to solve it is if everyone is on board. It can't be solved by any one nation alone. Certainly can't be solved by the UK alone. But we have a supply chain that has an international footprint. Therefore, our influence is inherently international when we're starting to talk about Scope 3 emissions. I don't think that everyone fully kind of grasps that picture, that it's an issue that everyone needs to solve. And in the face of pushback on climate, on climate commitments from different nations, or an absence of climate commitments from different nations, that doesn't mean everyone should throw in the towel. And that's where it gets emotional, isn't it? Because it becomes a motivation thing. It becomes a motivation subject, and it's if we're not doing it, or if they're not doing it, why should we? We can't make that change. But actually, if you give up the fight and no one does it, then to what we were saying before, the issues become eminently greater over time.
Yeah.
So yes, it's emotional. Should people chuck in the towel? No, I don't think so. We need, you kind of need to keep fighting the fight.
Absolutely. I think there's so many things to unpack there, but if you were to have that emotive conversation with someone who says, actually, I understand the facts and figures perfectly, I understand the climate science, and I know that if the UK goes to net zero, let's say by the end of this decade, it will make no difference. To have to try and get people to see the bigger picture is really difficult. And I think a key theme for me is leadership. So that's not just on a political level, it's not just in businesses, it's everywhere. You need to show that we are willing to stand up and do the right thing, whether that's to complement our business values, or whether, frankly, it's to show grit and determination on the world stage as a country, that I think is a really powerful mechanism for change. Because just dealing with these challenges in isolation is inevitably going to put people off and correctly let them conclude that the work that we're doing makes no difference. It absolutely has to be a collaboration and a bigger picture approach.
So I think that point is an excellent point to conclude on. Environmental and social change. In the UK, can we solve the climate crisis alone? No, we can't. Does that mean we can't make a difference? No, it doesn't. We need to demonstrate leadership. We need to demonstrate commitment. And we need to demonstrate that we are prepared to do what it takes to get us to net zero. And along the way, hopefully, we can influence other nations to follow in our footsteps. And at Gamma, we're really, really keen to be playing our part in that leadership commitment. So Callum, thank you for joining us today.
Absolute pleasure.
A great conversation. Really enjoyed that. So thank you for watching our Signpost. We have more sustainability podcasts coming up, so look out for them. Thank you.